Hey everyone, I'm here at Rustic and Blue with Dylan Wolff. The purpose of this video is to answer your questions about web development, and the reason why we got Dylan on the channel is because he's actually currently working as a remote developer and freelancing as well, right?
Yeah. Right.
And I've been threatening to do this video for like so long, but then you decided to spend like an extra month in Japan.
So I guess this is the great thing about living this lifestyle. So I'd planned to go to Seoul for a couple of weeks and then go down to Jeju Island for a bit of a retreat down at J-Space, which is a new co-working space that's just been set up by the South Korean government. Yeah. And one thing led to another, and I thought, you know, Tokyo is somewhere that's always been on the list that I've always wanted to go and check out, and it was only a 2-hour flight away. Yeah. So I thought, bugger it, I'll go to Tokyo for a month or so, which was another, you know, fantastic, mind-blowing experience. Yeah. But yeah, it's great to be back in Chiang Mai. It's been great to catch up with you again, and it's nice to finally have the opportunity to sit down and do this video and hopefully share, you know, some of the things that I've learned over the 12 to 18 month process that I've gone through to become a developer.
So yeah, if you're wondering why it took so long to put this video together, that's the reason why.
My bad.
So you might have heard of Dylan's story from my blog post. It's actually my Inspiring Nomad series. He was the first interview on that, so you can check that out on the blog. I'll link it here. But now it's time to jump right into the questions and yeah, answer what you guys want to know. All right, so Doug asks, what is the quickest track to have a marketable web dev set of skills?
I can only speak from my own experience, and I spent my first couple of months learning HTML and CSS, which I think, you know, regardless of whether you choose to specialise in front end or back end, you know, a basic understanding of HTML and CSS is something that everyone needs to have. Then for me, I decided that I wanted to start building web applications, which is how I sort of ended up learning Ruby on Rails. And the great thing about learning Ruby on Rails for me, back home in Melbourne, but I'm sure this is the case in other parts of the world, is that Melbourne has a great community around Ruby and Rails, so there are always people on hand to ask for support as you're learning. I'm sure there are Ruby and Rails meetup groups in various parts of the world as well, so it's quite a popular, Rails is quite a popular and well-supported framework, and for me, you know, Rails was enough for me, learning Rails was enough for me to land a job within about 9 months. But I think, you know, there are so many options out there and so many different things that you can learn, and I think when you're first starting out, I think, you know, you need to focus on having a basic understanding of, you know, the way the web works and a basic understanding of HTML and CSS, and then really dive deeply into one particular area of expertise. So whether you want to learn JavaScript inside out and back to front, or whether it's Rails or whether it's Ruby, I think, you know, you need to be conscious of not trying to learn everything, because it's just not possible. And I've been, you know, working as a developer for 9 months now, and I know probably this much of all of the information that's out there, and there's developers that have been around for, I don't know, 10 or 20 years, and I'm sure they would say something similar. So it really, there's no one answer. For me, Rails was an approachable framework to start with, and that's obviously worked in my case. So yeah, I think that's, you know, for someone just starting out, I think that's definitely worth looking at least.
Yeah, well, you touched on a few great things there, which I think we'll get to. There's a few overlap with these questions. Yeah. But one of the great things, and the thing that I recommend, and the same thing that worked for me, is that community aspect. You know, like in Brisbane, the same thing for me. In Brisbane, there was a Ruby on Rails community, and that was the main reason why I started learning Ruby on Rails. And through that community, I got my first job in web development. So that's really important. And I think, going back to the question with the marketable web skills, it's like, you know, looking at marketable is like, are people hiring, developers with those skills?
Yeah.
And I think, you know, just do a search and see, like, on job sites, like, if there's 10 jobs that are hiring Ruby on Rails developers and 1 job hiring, I don't know, some obscure programming language, then, you know, you probably want to, if you don't have a preference to any one language, I'd be choosing the one with the most demand. Would you agree?
Yeah, look, I would agree. Look, I think any language or framework that you learn, there will be work out there. And I guess it depends what the end goal is. So Do you want to learn enough that you can get a job working at an agency where you're working on a bunch of different projects and learning a bunch of different things, which is what I do, and that's been a great experience. Or do you want to work for a startup where you'll be working on the same product day in, day out? Or do you want to, take on freelance clients, fixing projects that people have had built by other developers? It kind of depends what your end goal is. For me, the goal was to work in an agency and get a lot of experience working on a bunch of different things. Again, particularly coming from Melbourne, there's a strong Rails community, and there's a lot of work out there for Rails and Ruby developers. But I think wherever you start, I think as long as you make a start, that's a positive thing. And if you spend 2 months learning JavaScript and you kind of feel like you've gone nowhere, well, when I first started, I spun my wheels for a couple of months, and at the time I thought that was wasted time. But looking back on it now, it's all valuable experience, because you're learning how to learn, and that other experience is always going to be there for you to call on. You're always going to have that knowledge, even if it's not. Like in my day-to-day role now, I don't use a lot of JavaScript, but I know enough about it to be able to interpret some existing code that someone's written and work out what's going on.
So Sumit asks, how long will it take to become a front-end web developer? And I guess this is the broader question here is like, how long can you expect from learning the skills or starting to learn to getting your first job? I'll start on this one. It took me, I just looked at my journals yesterday and to see how long it took me, and it was about just under 3 months. I started learning Ruby on Rails, and then went to a meetup, got the guy who was running the meetup's card. We were in talks for about a month, and then I started work basically. And I think the important thing with that to remember is by no means was I on their level when I got hired. It was more of a investing in me to sort of grow me. And I think with the job market the way it is, you can, depending on where you are, like I was in Brisbane, I don't know where it's like everywhere in the world, but there was enough of a market demand for web developers that they were willing to pick somebody up as me with low amount of skills, but develop me. And I think the most important thing was my enthusiasm, and that I was out there saying I wanted to learn. So I think that's important.
I would agree. I think it's very difficult to say, yes, look, it'll take you 6 months or it'll take you 12 months. I think it all depends on the time that you put into it, but then it's about how you market yourself as well. So I've read a lot of blog posts about how to find your first job as a web developer, and one of the really common suggestions there was to start a blog. And I write a blog, and I don't write much on it these days because it sort of served its purpose. But to blog about, write about the things that you're learning, to demonstrate that you can explain, a technical concept to non-technical people, for example. Get out to meetups, get out to community events, and they're all the things that I did, and it took me 9 or 10 months. In your case, it took you 3 months, which is awesome. I would tend to think that's probably fairly uncommon, but it's great. I mean, we've got friends here, Drew and Becca, who started learning to code probably 2 or 3 months ago, and they're already picking up, little bits of work on Upwork and Fiverr and those sort of things. So even that, could be a good way to start, just to, pick a very small project. And it just gives you something to measure yourself against. But to get back to the question, look, I would say 12 months is definitely achievable. Okay. But it depends how you spend that 12 months. And if you're serious about it, I think you could definitely do it.
9595 Itachi asks, when learning code, do you have to remember all the codes? I think that's a pretty easy one. You got Google as your friend, right?
Google is your friend. Stack Overflow is your friend. Even, the developers that I work with that have been developers for 10 years, it's not possible to hold all of that information in your head. I think, the thing you learn when you're learning to code is you learn how to get unstuck. So I get stuck every day. I'm sure the people that I work with get stuck fairly often as well, and it's about learning how to get unstuck, learning how to solve a problem, learning where to go to find information. No one, it's not possible to retain everything there is to know about JavaScript or Ruby or whatever it might be in your brain. So definitely, yeah, Google for sure.
B Gutter Rex 111 asks 2 questions actually. What skills are most in demand, and what sites do you use to find remote work? I used Upwork for a while, but I mean, I can give you guys recommendations. There's remoteok.io. Actually, I'll just put a list at the bottom of this video or in the resources. What skills are in most demand? Do you have any ideas on that?
Again, this is a really difficult question to answer. I mean, I know, for example, Stack Overflow does a developer survey every year to look at the level of demand for various coding, programming languages and frameworks. A lot of that information is out there. I think it's, you need to find something that interests you. Like I started learning a bit of JavaScript initially, and the syntax just confused me. Yeah. And it wasn't something, it wasn't code that I enjoyed writing. And then I discovered Ruby, and that was something that I did enjoy. So, I think I said earlier, I imagine there's work out there, for any programming language or framework that you might decide to learn, but it needs to be something that you enjoy writing, and ideally something that's got a good community around it. Yeah. And then, obviously the prevalence of work is a factor. Yeah. But I don't think that's, should be the primary decision that you're making when you're choosing what to learn. Well,
I think, the most famous ones, the ones with the most documentation, the ones with the most community are probably the best ones to measure demand from. But I mean, like you said, you can get work in, there's so many of these obscure languages that people get work in as well. I have a web developer friend here who's like, I'm like, what stack do you use? And he's like, oh, Grails. And I'm like, you mean Rails? And he's like, no, Grails. And I'm like, what is that? Because I guess on the back end, there's infinite amount of languages. I mean, on the front end, it's what your browser interprets, but on the back end, it's just any kind of program can figure that out. But I mean, like, I wouldn't, unless you particularly like a certain framework or you got a friend who's hiring that framework or language, I'd probably stick with the popular ones, like for web development, probably the biggest ones are Ruby on Rails, Python, PHP, anything else you can think of?
Oh, look, learning JavaScript then opens you up to the possibility of working either on the front end or the back end. I think the JavaScript world, as an outsider, I don't know a lot about JavaScript, but it's a community, or it's a language that changes fairly regularly. But I guess part of starting a career as a web developer is that you need to realise that you can't learn what you need to do to get a job and then sort of say, cool, that's it, I've got a job now I'm set, that's all I need to know. You need to be constantly learning and updating your knowledge anyway. As I've touched on a couple of times, Ruby and Rails work for me, and it's stuff that I enjoy writing. I don't write so much Rails these days, it's more just pure Ruby, but that's, that would be, there's so many options out there, it kind of just depends what you feel comfortable with, I suppose.
Alright, Maurice asks, what about buying lots of books? Personally, I told Maurice I don't really use books because to me it doesn't make sense like reading something here and then doing something here when all the resources you can have on your computer and you can have multiple monitors. An extra monitor is not expensive, or even switch back between them, and I just like watching videos. That's just me personally. Do you use books at all?
Look, I think you need to figure out what works best for you, and I think I've used a combination of books and video tutorials and one-on-one mentoring sessions. I've used all of those things, over the period that I've been learning. It's just about working out what works best for you, and some people work really well from a book. Where they can, sort of follow page by page or line by line, and they know exactly where they're at, and it's easy to go flick back a couple of pages if you've gone past something that you don't understand. I think it's probably good to use a combination, and some of the language books are really good because you know, buy a really solid book on Ruby, and then you've always got that as a reference to refer back to. So, yeah, I would say a combination, definitely.
All right. Nicholas asks, if you are applying for a job that requires coding, do all of the jobs require a college/university degree? And if you're asking me, I'm a big non-believer in university when it comes to development. Like, for instance, you didn't go to university to study it?
No, so I've sort of done some university study in my own time, but it's nothing that's at all related to web development or computer science. And I think that's the really great thing about this industry, is that in that regard the barrier to entry is quite low.
Yeah.
So I think if you wanted to work for a big corporate, if you wanted to work for IBM or Oracle or somewhere, then yes, a computer science degree would definitely be required. But I guess in my case, working for an agency, or even if you started off as a freelancer, taking on your own clients, then no, you absolutely don't need a university degree at all.
Look, I think the most important thing that employers are looking for is that you can do the job, right? So it's not based on how much theoretical knowledge you have. It's based on the work you do and the work you've done. And I know for my first job in web development, they didn't ask for, I don't think they even asked for a resume. They didn't ask for, where's your degree? They didn't even care. And what they asked for was a project. They said, do this simple app for us in Rails, like build it for us. And I built it. It took me about 2 days probably. I spent more time making it look, I spent extra time making it look good when they didn't actually care. They were just wanting to know like the programming, whether it was tight. But then they looked at it, they're like, okay, yep, you've got the basic skills of Ruby on Rails. This is a foundation we can build on, and they hired me based on that. So I think regardless of whether you choose to do a university degree or not, you got to, the main thing is you can do the job. And that's my criticism of university, is that you might do a 3-year degree, but if you're not building skills, you're not going to be hireable. Like, you're not going to have the skills, basically. It's all about skills. Yeah.
And I think, you touched on something that was really really important in the process for me being hired, and having discussions with the people that were responsible for hiring me, was that it wasn't necessarily about the knowledge that I had, and I had a very small amount of knowledge, and I'd built some small personal projects, and as part of the interview process worked on one of the company's existing projects to add some additional functionality. But it was more about, I think, the way I approached it and my attitude, and I know that I didn't know very much, but demonstrating that I was willing to learn and that I was willing to invest in myself, in my own time, I suppose, to keep learning, but also about cultural fit too. So, one of the comments the directors made was that they hire good people. So it's not necessarily about knowing everything. You could know everything, and if you're a bit of a dick, then you're not going to be a great fit probably in most companies. You need to be able to work well with other people. Everything else can be taught. And I think that's a really, really important thing to think about.
All right, Starberry911 asks, do you think going to university for a CAS degree is good just to get the college experience and help in networking? So we kind of answered the university question in the last question, but the interesting part of this question is help in networking. And I'm not sure what Starberry means by that, but do you think going to university helps with networking at all?
Look, personally, and again, I can only comment based on my own experience, but I think that, the 3 years that you might spend at university, it wouldn't take you that long, at least in my case, and definitely in your case, in the case of a lot of people we know, learning on your own, and there are other opportunities to network. So you can go to meetups, or you can go to things like, I think one of the things that helped me sort of get to know people in the industry was going to a couple of Rails camps back home in Australia, which are like an unconference sort of retreat that happens a couple of times in Australia for Ruby and Rails developers, and I know they have them in other parts of the world as well, and I'm sure other languages do something similar, and they're really good events to get along to, just to get to know other people in the industry in a less formal setting.
All right, Major Heavy asks, do you have to have good networking skills to be a freelancer? So this goes back to the networking again. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, look, I think, being able to market yourself is a really important skill, and it's a skill that maybe I don't think I had 6 or 12 months ago, and I'm still improving. In going out and finding freelance projects on the side, and learning how to interact with clients and how to find work. You need to, I guess particularly as a freelancer, to a potential client, you're an unknown quantity. So you can demonstrate, on your website or on GitHub or wherever, you can demonstrate some of the stuff that you've worked on in the past. But I think people want to work with good people, and they want to work with people that they can have a solid relationship with. And I think if you struggle to interact with people, or struggle to sell yourself, then I think that would be challenging, definitely.
I guess with my stuff, I focus on personal brand and reputation. I'm probably more on the personal brand side. I love building, writing content, like you said earlier about blogging. I love doing that. But my girlfriend Denise, on the other hand, she's all about reputation. She doesn't even have a website. She gets referred work through other people. I think the most important thing is do great work, and if you don't know whether you can do great work, you might maybe want to do a free project starting out. We had Graham Lawson on the podcast recently, and he said he definitely highly recommend doing your first project for free, and his first project, it wasn't web development, it was SEO, but he had a major impact on their business from that. And then once you have that, you can go off and charge people, and you have that reputation, and you can build on that. But yeah, to get direct to the question, have good networking skills to be a freelancer. I don't know. There's online freelancing now, and I know people are doing well on Upwork with that. We have friends, Steph Danforth, for example, who is going to be a guest on the podcast as well, hopefully, and she's done really well on Upwork. So networking skills definitely help, but I'm not sure if you have to be. The way the internet is now, that there's less need to, I guess, talk to people directly and go to in-person events.
I think even in your day-to-day life, if you've got good interpersonal skills, then that's worth things in other ways. So whether maybe it's not necessary in order to find work in your day-to-day life, there's skills that are worth having. So if that's an area where you're not so strong, then it's definitely something that's worth working on, I reckon.
All right, so following with the networking theme, Baraz asks, which sites do you use for networking? I've used meetup.com and to find the Ruby on Rails meetup that I found work through. Any sites that you find networking opportunities through?
Well, we probably need to give a plug to the #Nomads Slack. I think there's a good so that's the Slack group that sort of started it all for me, that Peter Levels started, #nomads.slack.com, and I think he's charging, I don't know, $65 a year or something for it now, but it's worth it in terms of building up a network of people. When you go to a new city, you can already, have people line up to catch up with for a coffee or a beer, and there's a jobs channel on there too, and there's a lot of advice on there about becoming a freelancer and finding work when you're, finding remote work while you're traveling. So that's definitely something that's worth looking into too, and that'd be probably the main one that I would suggest.
Yeah, actually, I use #Nomads as well, but I've used it just to connect with people on a social level. I haven't looked at it for jobs, but that's a good point.
Yeah.
So a question that I get asked a lot, and Uros asks it here, is which language should I start with, or which languages to learn? And I think we've touched on that a bit already.
I think we've covered it.
But yeah, basically, to reiterate, there's no one language that you should learn. We can't sit here and say PHP's hot, or JavaScript's hot, get in on it. I mean, you could make your decision based on what language is hot, or what you've heard from people is a good start. But yeah, I guess you just got to make a decision. Have your, how I made a decision personally was because of seeing the community there for Ruby on Rails, and seeing that there was a lot of forums and discussions online about it, and also I saw a bunch of jobs hiring. So that's how I decided which language to start learning, but there's no rules here. Alright, Zahir asks, what are the first steps I need to take to make money as a developer? And I think this is we've covered a lot so far already, and I think, just like I say all the time, build skills, and build, do great work and build a reputation, and people will pay you for good skills and good work, right? Do you have anything to add to that?
No, look, I think you've covered it. I think we've talked about, there's a lot of different options out there. There's a lot of different paths that you can take, and I think the most important one is just to start. Start learning something, and whether it's through Code Academy or Code School or Team Treehouse, and complete some courses on there, and you'll get a feel for whether this is something you're interested in, and whether it's something that you can do long term, and whether it's something you have an aptitude for. And I think once you make the decision that it's a good move for you, then there's plenty of other information out there about how to get started, and how to start taking on how to find your first freelance client, or how to find a job. I think that sort of all follows, that'll flow naturally, I think.
We're here at the final question, and Dylan's favourite question. Eric asks, I'm 32 and I just started learning to code. Is it too late? Dylan?
Yeah, look, absolutely not. So I was 34, like I think I said earlier, when I started learning, and it's not about how old you are, and when I first decided that this is what I wanted to do, I probably asked myself the same question, and has my opportunity passed? And in hindsight, I wish that I'd started learning to code when I was 18 or 20 years old, but I think you can't go back in time and change the decisions that you've already made. All you can do is sort of set yourself the goal and say that this is where I want to be in 6 months or 12 months time, and I don't think age has a real lot to do with it. I work with people that are older than me, and I work with people that are younger than me, and I think it's about what you bring to the table in terms of your skills and your willingness to learn, and being a team player, and how you interact with the people you work with, and the sort of contribution that you can make. And honestly, I don't think age is a consideration at all.
All right, awesome. Thanks for all the great advice, Dylan. Anything you want to end on? Any final advice? It's basically just to get started, start building those skills, right?
Yeah, I think if you're thinking about that, becoming a developer is something that you might want to do. I think there are so many free resources out there that you can get into, and you can start learning, without having to make a financial commitment. Whether it's Team Treehouse or Code School or Code Academy or any of the others that are out there, get on there and complete a couple of courses, and I think pretty quickly you work out whether it's something you have an aptitude for and something you have an interest in. And if it is, then set yourself a goal like I did and like you did, and just do the things you need to do to get there. So you start a blog and you write about the things that you're learning. You get out to meetups, and you get to know people in the community, and start marketing yourself. And if you do all of those things, and you're spending enough time getting your knowledge as solid as you possibly can, then job opportunities will come. There's plenty of work out there for people who can market themselves effectively, and for people who can work well with other people in a team. And even if your knowledge is, everyone has to start somewhere, and that was certainly the case for me. And I know that I'm learning with every new project that I take on at work. I'm learning, new things every day. So that knowledge will come, but yeah, at some point you just need to back yourself and start putting yourself out there and applying for work and see what happens.
Awesome stuff. Well, if you want to find out more about Dylan, you can head to dylanwolff.com, correct?
That's right.
That's right.
Not a lot going on there of late, but please go and check it out anyway.
But yeah, if you want to hear more about Dylan's story or my story, Dylan's going to be talking about his story on the podcast, the Chris the Freelancer podcast. They'll be coming out in the next few weeks. But when it's ready, I'll definitely link to it in this video in the description. And to hear more about my story, I have a video called How I Learnt to Code. And also I'm thinking of creating a larger resource, a book about everything I've learned from that whole process, how I learnt to code, how I got my first job within 3 months and kind of built it up. It's still, even though I don't do web development right now as a profession, it's what got me on the journey. It was what got me started. So yeah, if you want to check that out, I'll link it here. Yeah, any more questions, definitely send them our way. We could maybe even do another Q&A.
Yeah, definitely.
Or you know, I'll just answer them in the comments, or I'll send them to Dylan if he wants to answer them. But yeah, like we want to hear what you want to know. We want to help you guys. So if you have any more questions, definitely put them in the comments or send them our way. And as always, thanks for watching, and click subscribe for more great content, and we'll hope to see you on the next video.